Okay, so are you ready to dive into She Said? It's the book that kind of blew the lid off the whole Harvey Weinstein scandal and really kicked off the Me Too movement,
All
right?
right.
And it's not just a Hollywood story, which is what's so fascinating about it, I think. It's really about how power can silence victims, and it's about the courage it takes to speak up, even when it seems like, everything is stacked against you.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating to me about She Said is how it reads almost like a thriller, you know?
Right.
You've got Cantor and Twohey, these two journalists, and they're navigating this world, this very kind of shadowy world of whispers and legal threats. And you've got these incredibly powerful forces who are determined to keep a lid on everything.
Right. It's like 2017, women seem to be making all these huge strides, right? Like you've got, women leading countries, women are heading Fortune 500 companies. But then at the same time, you've got this dark undercurrent of harassment. Like this is still a thing, it's still pervasive, and it's so often just swept under the rug with NDAs and settlements. And so it's this weird disconnect.
It is, and that's really the core tension I think that She Said exposes, is that these systems, even in industries that we think of as being progressive, like Hollywood,
Yeah.
they're often designed to protect those in power, those at the very, very top, often at the expense of those without it.
Yeah. And so let's talk about these journalists for a second, Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey. They're working at the New York Times, and at some point, they start hearing these whispers about Harvey Weinstein, right?
Right.
These rumors that have been swirling around. Now, Kantor had already made a name for herself investigating workplace sexual harassment at places like Starbucks, Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
So this wasn't her first rodeo.
No, not at all. And that's so essential to the story, right? Because she brings this incredibly deep understanding of the patterns of abuse, these institutional blinders that allow it to flourish. She knew how to ask the right questions. She knew who to talk to. She knew how to connect the dots.
Yeah, she was like, I don't know, the perfect storm chaser, but instead of, chasing tornadoes, she's chasing, toxic power.
Right.
And it seems like everybody in Hollywood had heard something about Weinstein. It was like this open secret, but no one had really gone on the record, at least not publicly.
Yeah, and that's where the book gets really interesting because it dives into the whole world of NDAs, these legal agreements that are
Yeah.
so often used not just to protect privacy, which is, what they're often purported to do,
Right.
but to silence victims. And in Weinstein's case, his team used them very strategically, I would argue, almost like a weapon to buy the silence of the women that he had allegedly harmed.
Right, because it's chilling when you think about something that's designed to, I don't know, provide some kind of closure or, resolution, and it's wielded as this tool of intimidation.
Absolutely.
So where do Cantor and Toohey even begin with this? How do they even begin to crack this open? Because they're going up against, one of Hollywood's biggest players here.
They are. And, they started with those whispers, those rumors that have been circulating for years and years. And one of the first people to really give them a lead, albeit cautiously at first, was Rose McGowan, the actress Rose McGowan.
Right. And McGowan had been hinting at misconduct in the industry for a while, like on social media, right?
Yes.
But in 2017, she posts this kind of explosive tweet, and she talks about being raped by a studio head. Now, she didn't name Weinstein directly at first, which, you can almost feel that hesitation, right? That fear.
Absolutely. And that fear is so important to acknowledge because Weinstein wasn't just a powerful producer. He had this reputation for ruthlessness.
Mhm.
So to go up against him, even with the New York Times behind you, that's terrifying.
It's like taking on, I don't know, a monster almost, or,
Yeah,
and you don't know what's going to happen.
exactly.
So McGowan's tweet, as cryptic as it was like, dropping a pebble in a pond. Like,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, the ripples start to spread, and they lead Cantor and Toohey deeper and deeper into this investigation.
Yeah, it gives them a place to start finally.
Yeah.
And it wasn't easy. The book details how they faced all these dead ends and reluctant sources and just immense pressure, not just from Weinstein's team, but from this whole system that seemed to be designed to protect him.
So how did they convince anyone to talk? I get, because breaking through a culture of silence like that has got to be like pulling teeth.
It was incredibly difficult.
Mhm.
The book talks about how they really had to earn the trust of these women.
Right.
Because think about it. These are women who are risking, their careers, their reputations, even potentially their safety by speaking out.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, you're asking them to walk a tightrope over a pit of vipers. Like the stakes are that high.
Exactly, exactly. And what's interesting is how Cantor and Tuhei actually use their own backgrounds, their own experiences to connect with these women.
Yeah.
They'll talk about being working mothers, facing their own challenges, working very male-dominated fields.
Hmm.
And I think it's about building these bridges of understanding.
Totally, totally. Humanizing it a little bit because it's,
Yeah.
for all the Hollywood glitz and glamour, at the heart of it, it's about human beings and the choices that they make. And
Yeah.
so, as they start digging deeper into this, they uncover this pattern of settlements and NDAs, right?
Right.
And then they come across Zelda Perkins. Now, Perkins was an assistant at Miramax back in the 90s, and she signs an NDA after what she describes as, a pretty horrifying experience with Weinstein.
Yeah, and this is where I think the book goes beyond just exposing one man's behavior,
Mm.
right? Because Perkins' story, it raises these huge ethical questions about NDAs in general.
Right.
You know, here's this agreement that was supposed to protect her, but it ends up protecting him, allowing him to continue this alleged pattern of abuse, really for decades.
And she breaks that NDA knowing good and well that there could be legal repercussions.
She does?
I mean, that's a whole other level of courage to
Absolutely.
put yourself out there like that.
It is. And it illustrates, the limitations of these agreements, right? Like, should there be exceptions for cases involving criminal behavior? How do you balance protecting victims while also, ensuring due process? She said, it doesn't give you easy answers,
Hmm.
but it forces you to confront these really, really uncomfortable questions.
Yeah, because it's like you're shining a light on a system that's supposed to uphold justice, but often ends up obscuring it.
Mhm.
And so we see more and more women start to come forward. And then we meet Laura Madden. Now, Madden had worked as a production assistant on one of Weinstein's kind of early films, and she becomes this really pivotal source for Cantor and Tuhey.
She does, yeah.
But, she's battling cancer at the time, which makes her decision to speak out, even more powerful because
Absolutely.
you're already facing your own mortality, and to then step into this.
Exactly.
It-
And Madden's story is so heartbreaking. She
Right.
describes how the alleged harassment, how deeply it affected her, not just, her career, but also her mental health. And what's striking is that even years and years later, she's still hesitant to go on the record.
Mm.
She's afraid of the backlash, the damage it could do to her family.
It's that fear, that feeling of being utterly alone, I think, that keeps so many people silent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't, it's like, who do you turn to and will they even believe me?
Right.
And what if, by speaking up, I make things worse, not just for me, but for the people that I love? So she agrees to go on the record, though, right? What was the turning point for her?
I think it was a combination of things. She sees that other women are starting to speak out. So there's that sense of solidarity, perhaps.
Right, right.
And then there's Cantor, who, spends hours and hours with Madden, really listening to her, validating her experiences. And it speaks to the power of empathy in journalism, I think, especially when you're dealing with such incredibly sensitive subjects.
Totally. It's like you're building a bridge of trust across this chasm of fear and doubt, right?
Absolutely.
But we can't forget that, Weinstein wasn't just going to take all of this lying down. Like, he throws everything he's got at trying to kill this story.
Oh, absolutely. And the book details this whole campaign of intimidation and obfuscation that he launches.
It is tense.
I mean, he hires Black Cube, this private intelligence firm that was staffed by, get this, former Israeli spies.
Oh, wait. Former spies. Okay, this is better than a movie. Like, what are they hoping to find?
They were trying to find essentially anything that could discredit either the accusers or the journalists themselves.
Right.
Previous relationships, inconsistencies in their stories, anything that could be used to cast doubt on their credibility.
Oh my gosh, talk about pressure. So you've got these journalists trying to do their jobs, they're facing down threats from all sides. And on top of that, Daniel Weinstein himself, didn't he try to befriend them at one point?
It did. It's almost unbelievable, right?
It's wild.
Like, he's inviting them to lunches, he's trying to leverage his connections at the Times, even offered to help them with other stories, right? And it's classic manipulation, right? Trying to make them see him as an ally, as someone they could reason with.
Right, right. Like, hey, we're all on the same team here.
Right.
Let's just be cool about this.
Exactly, exactly.
But they didn't buy it, obviously.
No, they did not.
They were too smart for that.
They were much too savvy, much too experienced to fall for those tactics. And it really speaks to their integrity as journalists. I mean, they were determined to uncover the truth no matter how powerful the forces arrayed against them.
Right, and that truth went way beyond Weinstein himself, right? Because it also exposed how complicit his company was in silencing his accusers.
Absolutely. She said, really pulls the curtain back on this really disturbing pattern of behavior of the Weinstein Company, of people within the company using resources to silence women.
Yeah.
They would use financial settlements, often with NDAs attached, to make these accusations disappear.
And it wasn't just, a matter of looking the other way. Like, the book specifically mentions Erwin Ryder, who was a VP at the company.
Right.
And he admits to the journalists that they knew about at least some of Weinstein's behavior.
They did, yeah.
But their primary concern, and this is what's so chilling about it, is that they were concerned about the company's bottom line.
Yeah.
Not the well-being of the women who are involved.
It's a chilling example of how corporate interests can so often trump, basic human decency.
Right.
And it highlights a systemic problem, not just in Hollywood, but I think in any industry, where you have this concentration of power at the top.
Right, where the stakes are so high that it's...
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
When money and influence are at stake, those ethical considerations, they often take a back seat.
Yeah, so how on earth did they finally break through all of this and publish the story? Because at this point, it's like they are facing an uphill battle. I mean, it's got to be daunting, right? You've got these legal threats coming at you. You've got some of the most powerful people in the industry trying to discredit you.
Oh, absolutely, and it takes a toll.
Yeah.
The book doesn't shy away from that, like the emotional and mental toll that this investigation took on everyone involved.
Yeah, so how do they finally get the green light? Like, how do they convince the powers that be at the New York Times to hit publish?
It's a testament to, I think, two things. One, the meticulous reporting, right? Dotting every I, crossing every T. And two, just incredible courage, both on the part of the journalists and their sources. And I think a key turning point, you were talking about Ashley Judd earlier.
Right.
She was so hesitant initially to go on the record.
Right, and understandably so.
Understandably so. But she ultimately makes that decision. She puts her name on the record, and it's a game changer because it lends this incredible weight to the story. This credibility that makes it impossible to ignore.
It's like that domino effect, right? Where it's like one person has the courage and then it gives someone else the courage and
Absolutely.
and it builds and builds.
Right, and to add to that, just days before the initial story set to run, another media outlet, they get wind of the investigation and they threaten to break the story first.
Oh, wow.
Which, ironically, I think works in Kantor and Twohey's favor because it lights a fire under everyone. Like, they know they have to publish and they have to do it right away.
Wow, talk about like high stakes journalism.
It doesn't get much higher than that.
So the story drops and what happens? Because we know now, obviously, that this becomes this global phenomenon, this watershed moment.
Right.
But did they know it at the time? Like, did they have any sense
I
that...
don't think anyone could have predicted the sheer magnitude of what happened. And I think that's what's so incredible about She Said. It captures this massive cultural shift, this seismic shift, but it does so from the inside, showing us, the painstaking work, the immense courage that it took to get there. Because when that story broke, it wasn't just a news cycle. It was like this dam breaking.
It's true. I mean, it really did unleash something. And
It did.
and you see, and what I think is so fascinating too is that She Said goes beyond Hollywood.
It does.
You see parallels in what was happening, for example, in the political sphere with like the Christine Blasey Ford case.
Absolutely.
You have this woman, this respected professor, who comes forward and accuses Brett Kavanaugh, who, at the time was a Supreme Court nominee, of sexual assault. And
again, you see those same themes of power and silence, this immense pressure on women, particularly, to stay quiet.
right.
And it underscores, I think, how these issues are not confined to, one industry, one segment of society.
Yeah.
They are so deeply, deeply woven into the fabric of our culture.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that even with all the progress that we've made, as a society, we still have a really long way to go in terms of believing survivors and holding abusers accountable.
A long way to go, absolutely.
Mhm.
And I think, she said, it doesn't offer easy answers,
Mm.
but it does leave you with this incredibly powerful message. And that message is silence protects abusers,
Mhm.
and speaking out, while difficult, while often painful, can be the catalyst for real, meaningful, lasting change.
Right, it's about changing the system itself, right?
Yes.
Not just taking down one bad guy, but really looking at the underlying power dynamics that allow abuse to flourish in the first place.
Exactly, exactly. It reminds us that we all have a role to play in creating a world where everyone feels safe and empowered to speak their truth. And that starts with listening to survivors, believing them, and supporting their right to be heard.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
She said, "The book, everyone, it's a story about the power of journalism, the courage of women who speak out, and the importance of challenging those in power." A must-read for sure,
Yeah.
and I'm so glad we got to, take this deep dive together.
Me too. It's one of those books that really, it stays with you, long after you finish that last page.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.